I can still recall the weight of that loss when I was just 5. The hollow space left behind after my mother passed away. At that young age, I barely grasped the concept of death, but I understood the emptiness her absence created. It echoed in the quietness of our home, in the way my father's hand would linger on the back of his chair at dinner as if expecting her to join him. At only 23, my father suddenly became my entire world. He was young, resilient, and unwavering. While many might have crumbled under the burden of sorrow and responsibility, he rose each morning without fail, determined to shape a life for the two of us. I admired him long before I even knew what admiration meant. He spent long days working in a factory, his hands rough and worn, his smiles fatigued. Yet, no matter how exhausted he was when he returned home, he always made time to kneel beside my bed, his voice soft and comforting as he read me bedtime stories. Those were the moments I felt safest. I cherished his laughter, rare as it was, and the way his eyes crinkled when he looked at me as though I was his entire world. And I was. Now, at 17, adulthood looms on the horizon, vast and uncertain. My 18th birthday is just days away, yet the future feels overwhelming. As I glance at my father across the living room, I notice the streaks of gray in his dark hair, the lines etched into his face from years of sacrifice. I wonder how he feels about time slipping away. I may be his daughter, but for years I have been more than that. A quiet, steadfast partner in a bond forged through loss and survival. In many ways, my birthday feels like a turning point, not just for me, but for us both. As if the world is waiting to test the strength of the shelter we've built together, one that has protected us for so long. The morning of my 18th birthday was unlike any before it. The scent of something warm and sweet drifted into my room, coaxing me from sleep. I stretched, rubbing my eyes, momentarily forgetting the day's significance. Then, as the soft morning light filtered through my window, reality settled in. I was officially an adult. As I padded into the kitchen, I halted in surprise. My father stood at the stove, his crisp white shirt sleeves rolled up, his dark hair slightly tousled yet fitting. The table was arranged with a level of care I had never seen before. 2 plates, polished silverware, and in the center, the largest bouquet of deep red roses I had ever seen. "Morning, birthday girl," he greeted, turning toward me with a smile that softened his sharp features. His eyes brightened when they met mine, and for a fleeting moment, I caught something unfamiliar in them. Perhaps quiet pride or the weight of 18 years flashing through his mind. "Dad, what is all this?" I asked, though the grin on my face betrayed my delight. "Breakfast," he said simply, as if it wasn't the most thoughtful thing he had done in a long time. I stepped closer, taking in the delicious aroma of fresh pancakes and syrup. "You didn't have to do all this." His brows furrowed, his tone light but firm. "Of course I did. My little girl isn't so little anymore." The words hung between us, thick with meaning, but he didn't linger on them. Instead, he motioned for me to sit. As I did, he stepped briefly into the hallway, returning with a small box wrapped in silver ribbon. Placing it in front of me, he stepped back slightly, watching my reaction. "What's this?" I asked, hesitating before reaching for it. "Open it," he encouraged, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. Carefully, I untied the ribbon, letting it slip away as I lifted the lid. Inside was the most breathtaking dress I had ever seen. Deep red, shimmering in the light. My fingers traced the fabric, soft and smooth as a wave of emotion swelled in my chest. "Dad," I whispered, looking up at him. "You deserve something beautiful," he said, his voice steady, though his expression was bare, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. "Something as stunning as you." His compliment caught me off guard, heat rushing to my cheeks. His words were kind, yet there was a depth to them that left me unsure how to respond. "Thank you," I murmured, standing to wrap my arms around him. His embrace was warm, familiar, yet in that moment it carried a new weight. "Try it on," he suggested, stepping back with a gentle smile. I nodded and retreated to my room, slipping into the dress. It fit perfectly, hugging my frame in a way that made me feel both elegant and self-conscious. When I stepped back into the room, his reaction was immediate. His gaze swept over me and he smiled, a mixture of pride and something else I couldn't quite place. You look. He paused, searching for the right word. Beautiful. I twirled, laughing softly, trying to shake off the strange energy that lingered in the air. It's perfect, I admitted, and I meant it. The rest of the morning unfolded like a dream. Breakfast was delicious. Fluffy pancakes, fresh fruit, and coffee sweetened just the way I liked it. My father's attention was more deliberate than usual, his compliments more frequent. He made sure I had everything I needed, and at one point he reached across the table to brush a stray lock of hair from my face. His fingers lingered just a second longer than expected, the gesture so gentle, so deliberate, that I didn't pull away. Instead, I met his gaze, sensing something there I couldn't quite interpret. You've grown up so fast, he murmured, almost as if speaking to himself. 18 years isn't that quick, I teased, trying to lighten the mood. He chuckled, though his smile carried a trace of sadness. Feels like yesterday you were running around in pigtails, dragging that stuffed bunny everywhere you went. I laughed too, recalling the memory. Benny the bunny, I said. You hated that thing. I didn't hate it, he corrected with a shake of his head. I just hated that I couldn't wash it without you crying. Our conversation drifted to stories from my childhood, moments I had long forgotten, but that he remembered with startling clarity. Each recollection felt like a gift, a testament to how deeply he had been present in my life. But beneath the nostalgia and laughter, there was an unspoken change. He no longer spoke to me just as his daughter, but as someone fully grown, a woman. It was in the way his compliments lingered, the way his fingers brushed mine when passing the syrup, the way his gaze softened in a way that felt different. As the day continued, I became more aware of the weight of his gaze whenever I spoke. When I stood to gather the dishes, his hand rested gently on my shoulder, stopping me. Let me, he said, his tone both soft and firm. I gave him a small smile and stepped aside. Thank you, Dad, for everything. There's no need to thank me, he responded, locking eyes with me in a way that made my chest tighten. I just want you to be happy. Always. Though the day was far from over, it already felt like the most memorable birthday I had ever experienced. And though I couldn't quite articulate why, I knew this day wasn't just significant for me. It held meaning for him, too. The rest of the morning felt almost dreamlike, filled with a depth of warmth I had never felt so profoundly before. My father remained close, his every gesture full of a careful attentiveness that made me feel deeply cherished. As we sat in the living room sipping the tea he had prepared, he turned to me with a smile that softened his usually sharp features. You remind me so much of your mother, he said, his voice carrying a tenderness laced with nostalgia. I hesitated, my cup halfway to my lips. He had mentioned it before, but today the words carried a weight they never had before. Really? I asked, setting my cup down and meeting his gaze. He nodded. Just as beautiful. Just as kind. His expression softened and his voice lowered. She would be so proud of you. The young woman you've become. A gentle warmth spread through me, and I felt a small smile tug at my lips. That means a lot, Dad. Thank you. His words lingered in the air, wrapping around me like a comforting embrace. I loved hearing about my mother, even though the memories were always tinged with a quiet sadness. I had been too young when she passed to remember much, but the way my father spoke of her made me feel connected to her in ways that went beyond words. You know, he continued, his tone shifting to something lighter. Today is all about you. How would you like to spend it? I tilted my head, considering the question. I'm not sure. This morning has been so perfect that I haven't thought about anything else. Well, he said, leaning back and crossing his arms with a playful smirk. I may have taken the liberty of planning something for tonight, if that's all right with you. My curiosity sparked. Oh? I asked, raising an eyebrow. What kind of something? His grin held a mix of excitement and nervousness. I made a reservation at a nice restaurant. It's nothing too extravagant, but I thought it would be special. Only if you're up for it, of course. The idea of spending the evening out, just the two of us, filled me with anticipation. I'd love that, I said sincerely. Good, he replied, his smile widening slightly. I'd really like you to wear the dress I gave you, if that's okay. I nodded. my heart fluttering at the thought of how much effort he had put into making this day so special. It's more than okay, Dad. Thank you. The rest of the afternoon passed in a quiet blur of shared stories and unspoken emotions. We spent hours reminiscing, laughter echoing through the walls as we recalled memories that felt both distant and close at once. The outside world seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of us in a space filled with warmth and connection. As the evening neared, I slipped into the red dress. Its smooth fabric hugged my figure perfectly, as if it had been made just for me. Which, in a way, it had. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the straps and smoothing out the skirt. My own reflection caught me off guard. I looked different, older, more poised. Stepping out into the living room, I found my father adjusting the collar of his dark blazer. He turned at the sound of my footsteps, and for a brief moment, his expression froze. You, he started, his voice trailing off as his gaze swept over me. You look stunning. Heat rushed to my cheeks, and I glanced down, nervously smoothing the fabric of my dress. Thank you, Dad. No, he said, stepping closer, his voice firmer. Really, you look perfect. The sincerity in his tone filled my chest with warmth, and I couldn't help but smile. You clean up pretty well yourself, I teased, hoping to ease the sudden intensity of the moment. He chuckled, then extended his arm toward me. Shall we? The restaurant was just as charming as he had described. Soft lighting bathed the space in a golden glow, and the low hum of conversation created an intimate atmosphere. He had chosen a table by the window where we could see the city lights twinkling like scattered stars. As we settled into our seats, he reached across the table, taking my hand gently in his. Thank you for letting me plan this, he said, his gaze locking with mine in a way that made my breath catch. Thank you for everything, I replied, giving his hand a small squeeze. This is the best birthday I could have imagined. The evening unfolded like a dream. The food was incredible, the conversation effortless and filled with laughter. My father shared stories about my mother, tales from their early days together, each one painting a vivid picture of the love they had shared. She had this way of lighting up a room, he mused, his voice soft with reminiscence. Just like you. I felt my cheeks grow warm again, but this time it wasn't from embarrassment. It was a different kind of warmth, one that spread from deep within, a feeling of being truly seen and cherished. As the night progressed, there was an unspoken closeness between us, one that felt both familiar and subtly new. He was attentive in a way that made me feel treasured, pulling out my chair, refilling my glass, ensuring my comfort. It was as if he wanted to imprint every detail of this night into our memories, making sure it would never fade. When we finally returned home, the house was still and quiet, the evening's emotions lingering in the air like the soft glow of candlelight. Dad, I said softly as we stood near the door, this was the best birthday I've ever had. His smile was warm, his eyes shining with something unspoken. I'm glad. You deserve it. I stepped forward, wrapping my arms around him. He pulled me close, his embrace steady and filled with the kind of quiet love that needed no words. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence carried more meaning than anything we could have said. Happy birthday, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Thank you, I murmured, my voice trembling slightly with emotion. As I stepped back, our eyes met, and in that instant, I understood something unspoken. Today wasn't just a celebration of my birthday. It was a tribute to us, to the bond we had built, to the love that had carried us through all these years. The night felt like a dream I wasn't ready to wake from. The warmth of the restaurant still lingered in my heart as we stepped inside, the soft click of the door behind us grounding me in the moment. My father, or maybe something more. I should refer to him differently now. The house was unusually quiet as he placed his keys on the counter, his movements slow, almost as though he were deep in thought. Can I ask you something? He asked after a brief pause, his voice quieter than usual. Of course, I responded, intrigued. He turned to me, his face kind but contemplative. Tonight, just for tonight, would you call me by my name? I blinked in surprise. You mean? Yes, he interrupted, almost bashfully. Just Ethan, not Dad. I paused, trying to understand his request. It felt odd, almost wrong, But the way he looked at me, so sincere, so vulnerable, made it impossible to refuse. Okay, Ethan, I said softly, testing the name. It felt strange, yet oddly appropriate in the moment. His smile was small but genuine, as though I had given him an unexpected gift. Thank you, he whispered. I wanted to ask him why, but the moment didn't seem to require any questions. Instead, I let the silence hang between us, warm and unspoken, as I started toward my room to change out of my dress. He stopped me with a gentle touch on my arm. Wait, he said, his voice light but purposeful. I want to take a picture of you. A picture? I asked, caught off guard. He nodded, a soft laugh escaping him. You look amazing tonight, and I want to capture that. I used to take so many photos of your mother. She always said they were her favorites because they weren't for anyone else, just for us. His words stirred a pang of bittersweet emotion, but there was something about the way he spoke that made me feel special. Okay, I agreed, smiling. Where do you want me? Wait here, he said, stepping into the living room. I followed after a moment, curious, and found him adjusting a small lamp with a warm, golden light. He switched off the overhead lights, leaving the room bathed in a soft glow. Perfect, he murmured, stepping back to admire his work. Stand here by the window. I obeyed, feeling the smooth fabric of my red dress against my skin as I moved. The lamp's light made the color of the fabric appear deeper and richer. He raised his camera, an old one I hadn't seen him use in years. Just relax, he said, his voice soothing. You don't have to pose. Just be yourself. I laughed softly, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. Easier said than done. You're doing great already, he reassured me, snapping the first photo. His tone was steady, calm, like an artist admiring their canvas. Tilt your head a little. Yes, just like that. You're beautiful. The compliment made heat rise to my cheeks, but I followed his instructions, feeling both self-conscious and flattered as the camera clicked. He offered more gentle praise. That smile suits you, he said at one point. You have the same spark your mother had. It's mesmerizing. His words enveloped me, filling the room with an intimacy I hadn't expected. For a moment, I felt like I was seeing myself through his eyes, not just as his daughter, but as someone radiant and worth celebrating. When he lowered the camera, his face was unreadable for a moment, then softened into something I could only describe as pride. I think that's enough, he said, setting the camera down gently. But you were perfect. I laughed nervously, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. I'm not sure I've ever been called perfect before. You are to me, he said simply, stepping closer. His voice was steady, without hesitation, just a quiet truth that made my heart ache in the best possible way. He reached out and pulled me into a hug. His arms felt stronger than usual, and the embrace lingered longer than it might have any other day. I rested my head on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my cheek. You've grown into an amazing woman, he said softly, his voice carrying a weight I couldn't quite place. Your mother would be so proud. Thank you, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. He pulled back just slightly to look at me and pressed a gentle kiss to my cheek. It wasn't unusual for him to show affection, but tonight the gesture felt deeper, as though it held everything he couldn't express in words. When he pulled away, his hand lingered on my shoulder before he stepped back. I'll make us some tea, he said, his tone returning to its usual warmth. Why don't you change into something more comfortable? I nodded, my heart still fluttering from the intensity of the moment. Okay, I said, offering him a small smile before retreating to my room. As I slipped out of the dress and into my favorite sweater, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My hair was a bit tousled, my cheeks still flushed, and my eyes held a brightness I hadn't seen in a long time. I looked different. I couldn't put it into words, but something between us had shifted that night. Something unspoken but undeniably real. As I made my way back to the kitchen, the warmth of it lingered in my chest like the golden glow of the lamp still illuminating the living room. The air felt different as I entered the living room, still bathed in that soft, warm light. Ethan stood at the counter, focused as he prepared the tea, and somehow, it made the moment feel even more intimate. It was hard to believe how much had changed between us in the span of just one evening. When he looked up and saw me, his expression softened. "I was just about to bring this to you," he said, holding up 2 steaming mugs. I smiled and walked over to him. "I'm not used to all this attention," I admitted with a quiet laugh. "You deserve it," he said simply, handing me one of the mugs. His voice was calm, but the way his eyes lingered on me spoke volumes. We moved to the couch, the room now wrapped in a peaceful stillness. The warmth of the tea and the soft hum of the evening made everything feel almost surreal. As we sipped in comfortable silence, I found myself stealing glances at him, studying how the light caught the lines of his face. He looked tired, but in a way that carried a sense of peace, as if this evening had meant as much to him as it had to me. "I have something to say," he said suddenly, setting his mug down on the table and turning to face me fully. My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He hesitated for a moment, his hands resting on his knees as he searched for the right words. "Tonight has been special," he began. "Not just because it's your birthday, but because—" His voice trailed off as he exhaled slowly. "Because I've realized how much I've missed moments like this." "Me too," I replied, feeling a lump form in my throat. "It's been such a long time since we've been this close." He nodded, his gaze focused but gentle. "You remind me so much of your mother," he said again, but this time his voice carried a deeper feeling. "Not just in the way you look, but in the way you make everything feel brighter, warmer. She had that same light, and you've kept it alive in ways I don't think you even realize." The lump in my throat grew, and I set my mug down, suddenly overwhelmed. "Ethan," I started, but I couldn't find the words to continue. "I know this might sound strange," he continued, leaning slightly closer. "But tonight, seeing you, hearing your laugh, watching you in that dress, it's like I'm seeing you for the first time. Not just as my daughter, but as this incredible, beautiful woman." My breath caught at his words, and for a moment all I could do was stare at him, my heart racing. There was something in his eyes, something raw and unshielded, that made it impossible to look away. "I hope I haven't said too much," he added, his voice softer now. "No," I responded quickly, shaking my head. It's just a lot to take in." He gave me a small smile, his hand reaching out to gently brush a strand of hair from my face. His touch was so soft, so intentional, that I found myself leaning into it without even thinking. "You're everything to me," he said quietly. "You always have been." Before I could reply, he leaned in, his movements slow and deliberate, giving me every chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. His lips brushed mine, soft and hesitant as if testing the waters. The world seemed to freeze in that moment. The warmth of his kiss, the way his hand cupped my face, the silent emotions passing between us. It was overwhelming and unfamiliar, yet it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When he finally pulled back, his eyes searched mine, filled with both vulnerability and uncertainty. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I shouldn't have." I shook my head, my heart pounding in my chest. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "Don't apologize." For a long while, we sat in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling between us. I didn't know what it meant or where we would go from here, but I knew one thing with complete certainty. Tonight had changed everything.